I've been thinking a lot recently about how I actually got here. And I don't mean here as in sitting in front of a camera recording this video. I mean here in life. Because when I look back over the last 23 years of my working life, the journey almost makes sense now. But living through it, it definitely didn't. At 16 years old, I left school and went to catering college because I wanted to become a chef. And since then, I've worked in pubs and restaurants. I moved away from a home to work in a major London hotel. I trained as a pastry chef. I've worked in our family engineering business. I managed catering operations, studied for a bachelor's degree, worked at the National Trust, started several businesses, became an educator, completed a master's degree, and won awards along the way. I've also bought businesses in this journey. And for the last few years, I've had the privilege of helping other entrepreneurs turn ideas into businesses and into social enterprises. And now, at 39 years old, I'm trying to build my biggest ambition yet, and that's ambition to achieve. When I say all of that quickly, it sounds like I had some brilliantly designed master plan. I really didn't, not even close. There have been times in my life when I've known exactly where I wanted to go, and there have been times when I haven't had a clue. I have taken the opportunities, and I've walked away from opportunities. I've taken risks, and I've made mistakes, and I've succeeded at things, and I've also failed at things. And there have been plenty of moments where I've stopped and thought, what on earth am I actually doing? But when I look back now, I can see something running through every single chapter of my life, and that was ambition. And I don't mean the loud, flashy version of ambition we're often sold. I mean the ambition to grow, to learn and to try, and to take an opportunity when it appears, and to build something that didn't exist before. Now, my ambition has changed as I've changed. At 16, ambition meant becoming a chef. Then it meant London, then management and education, building businesses and helping other entrepreneurs build theirs. And now, it means something completely different again. So to understand why I'm building ambition to achieve today, I need to take you back to where this whole journey started. A 16-year-old lad from Anglesey who just wanted to cook. My journey really started when I was 16 years old. I left school and went to catering college to train as a chef. And at that age, becoming a chef wasn't just a career option for me. It was the ambition. It was what I wanted to do. I love food, I loved cooking, and I loved creating something from nothing and seeing people enjoy what I'd made. And like most young chefs, I started at the bottom. I worked in various local restaurants and pubs, learning the trade, gaining experience, and slowly beginning to understand what working in a professional kitchen actually meant. Because the reality of being a chef is very different from cooking at home. Professional kitchens can be intense places. They're hot, they're noisy, they're fast. And when the orders start coming in, you can't just decide that you're not feeling particularly motivated that day. People are waiting and the pressure is building, and you have to perform. Now, looking back, those early years taught me lessons that have followed me throughout my entire career. And they were preparation, discipline, resilience, attention to detail, and working under pressure. And probably one of the most important lessons of all was the difference between being interested in something and being committed to it. Because it's easy to say that you want something, it's much harder to keep going when you're tired, under pressure, and questioning whether you've made the right decision. But then came an opportunity that felt enormous. It felt like my big break. I got an opportunity to move to London and worked at the Sheraton Park Lane Hotel in Piccadilly, where I trained as a pastry chef. And for a young lad from Anglesey, this was huge. I'd gone from working in local pubs and restaurants in North Wales to working in a major hotel in the middle of London. Suddenly, everything was really different. The scale was different, the expectations were different, the standards were different, and the pace was different. Even life outside of work was completely different. I was a long way from home, but I was doing what I thought ambitious people were supposed to do. I'd taken that opportunity, I'd moved away, and I was pushing myself. And I was learning, and I was gaining experience that I could never have gained by staying inside my comfort zone. And I am incredibly grateful for that experience, but I also want to be truthful about this part of my story, because we often tell stories about ambition as if every big opportunity has to lead to a perfect ending. Well, mine didn't. I became incredibly homesick, and I was becoming burnt out by the relentless pace of the hospitality industry, and I was still very young. I was a long way from Anglesey, and I started questioning whether the dream I'd worked towards was actually the life I wanted to live. Now that's a difficult feeling, because when you've spent years telling yourself and other people what you want to do with your life, changing your mind can feel like failure, Coming home can feel like going backwards, and walking away from an opportunity can feel like you've wasted it. But I know something now that I didn't understand then. Ambition isn't about staying on the road simply because you once decided to walk down it. Sometimes ambition means having the courage to change direction and walking away. So I made the decision to leave London. I came back home to Anglesey, and at the time I had absolutely no idea what was going to happen next. I thought I was going to come home and take a temporary step backwards, but looking back now, I was actually about to take the first step towards an entirely different life. So I came home to Anglesey. I'd gone from working in a major hotel in the middle of London to working in my family's engineering business, and I want to be completely truthful about this part of the journey. This wasn't some carefully planned career move, and there was no master plan. I didn't come back to Anglesey thinking, right, this is the next strategic stage of my career. Not at all. At the time, I saw it as a stopgap. I needed to work, I needed to earn money, and I needed to gain some experience. And if I'm honest, I probably needed some time to work out what I actually wanted to do next. I think a lot of people experience periods like this in their life. You've walked away from one chapter, but you don't know what the next chapter looks like yet. And that's a strange place to be, because when you're ambitious, standing still can feel incredibly uncomfortable. And you start questioning yourself. Have I made the right decision? Should I have stayed in London? Did I leave too soon? Have I just taken a massive step backwards? What am I going to do in my life now? And the strange thing about life is that we only tend to tell these stories afterwards, once everything has worked out. We look backwards and join all the dots together. We make every decision sound deliberate, and every job sounds like part of the plan. Every setback becomes an important lesson, but when you're actually living through it, you don't know that yet. You don't know whether the decision you've just made is going to be the best decision of your life or a complete disaster. You're just trying to make the best decision you can with what you know at that moment in time. And that's exactly where I was. But working in the family engineering business wasn't wasted time. Far from it. For the first time, I was experiencing a completely different industry, a different working environment, and a different type of business. There were different customers and pressures and different ways of doing things. And although I didn't realise it at the time, I was beginning to build something incredibly valuable. And that was perspective. Because when you've only ever worked in one industry, it's easy to believe that the way your industry works and the way that everything works. Then you step into a completely different world and realise there are different ways to lead, and there are different ways to communicate and solve problems, and different ways to run a business. And I learned a lesson during that period that has stayed with me ever since. Very little genuine experience is ever wasted. You might not understand how it fits into your story at the time, but years later you can suddenly see it. A conversation or a job in a difficult period, or a skill you learned without realising it, they all become part of the person you're becoming. And then another opportunity came along, an opportunity that would completely change the direction of my career. I was offered my first role in hospitality management. It was in contract catering, managing a catering operation at a local government site. And this was a big moment for me, because up until this point, I understood kitchens and I understood food and service. I knew how to work hard, but now I was being given responsibility for people and standards and customers, budgets and stocks and costs, and being able to solve problems and make decisions. And suddenly I started seeing hospitality through a completely different lens. I wasn't just interested in what was happening in the kitchen anymore. I became fascinated by the business behind it. Why do some operations work incredibly well while others struggle? How do you lead the team properly? How do you control costs without damaging quality? How do you create a great customer experience? And how do you make decisions when there isn't an obvious right answer? So for the first time in my career, I started to realise something. Maybe my future in hospitality wasn't only about being a chef. Maybe there was another side of me that I hadn't discovered yet. A manager, a leader, someone interested in business. And that curiosity eventually led me to make another decision. While I was building my management experience, I decided to go back into education myself. So I enrolled to study for a bachelor's degree in hospitality management, and that decision was about to open up my world all over again. Starting my first management role changed something within me. Until that point, most of my working life had been all about the craft, the food, the cooking and the service, and getting through a busy shift and making sure that our customers were happy. But management forced me to look at the bigger picture. Suddenly, I wasn't just thinking about what was happening today. I was thinking about tomorrow, next week, next month, and I had to think about people and budgets and stocks, costs, waste and standards and customer expectations and performances, and of course problems, lots and lots of problems, because that's something else you quickly learn when you become a manager. People don't usually come looking for you when everything's going brilliantly. They come looking for you when something has gone wrong, and it becomes your responsibility to stay calm, work out what needs to happen next and make a decision. That role taught me an enormous amount about responsibility, but more importantly it made me curious. I started asking questions. Why do some businesses seem to thrive while others struggle? Why can two businesses offer almost the same product or service in almost the same area, and one becomes incredibly successful while the other disappears? And what makes a good leader? Why do some teams work brilliantly together while others don't? And how do you control costs without destroying quality? And how do you create an experience that makes a customer want to come back? So I became fascinated by all of it. And I think that curiosity was one of the reasons I decided to study for my bachelor's degree in hospitality management. Now, this was a big commitment. I was working, I had responsibilities, and alongside all of that, I was studying for a degree. But something happened that I probably hadn't expected. I absolutely loved it. I loved learning, I loved being challenged, and most importantly, I loved being able to connect what I was studying with what I was experiencing in the real world. Because suddenly, things I'd encountered at work started making more sense. Marketing wasn't just putting an advert in a newspaper or creating a poster. It was about understanding people. Who's your customer? Why do they actually want? Why should they choose you? And finance wasn't just about whether there was money in the bank. It was about understanding costs and margins and cash flow and pricing and sustainability. Now, leadership wasn't simply about having a job title and telling people what to do. It was about communication, having that trust and motivating people, and being accountable for the work that I did, and bringing different personalities together around a shared goal. And strategy. Strategy wasn't having one brilliant idea. It was understanding where you are, where you want to go, and what needs to happen in between. And I was beginning to see business differently. And I was beginning to see myself differently too in this process. The 16-year-old version of me wanted to become the best chef I could be, but now my ambition was evolving. I wanted to understand business, I wanted responsibility, and I wanted to lead. And I wanted to improve things and know how things worked, and perhaps, even more importantly, why they didn't work. Then another opportunity came along. I was offered the catering manager role with the National Trust, and this gave me the opportunity to take everything I'd learned so far and apply it in a completely different environment. I was now working within a major organisation and a recognised brand, and an organisation with history, values and a wider purpose, but also an organisation that had to think commercially. And that balance fascinated me, because one of the biggest lessons I learned during this period of my career is that purpose and commercial thinking are not enemies. You can care deeply about your mission. You can want to protect something and preserve something and improve a community and make a difference. But if the operation behind that mission isn't sustainable, eventually the mission suffers too. Working in that environment taught me invaluable lessons. Things like commercial performance and planning and customer experience, managing teams and working within systems, and understanding standards and making decisions within a larger organisation, and learning that sometimes the smallest operational decisions can have a huge impact on the overall customer experience. By this point, I had gone from being the person preparing the food to becoming somebody who was increasingly interested in the whole operation, the people, the customer, the money, the systems and the strategy, and the purpose. And slowly, another thought started creeping into my mind. It was quiet at first, but it kept getting louder. I'd worked in businesses and I'd managed operations. I was studying business and hospitality management, and I was learning how organisations worked. And I started wondering, could I actually build something of my own? Could I take everything I'd learned so far and create my own business? And eventually, that question became impossible to ignore. So I decided to find out. I left the security of employment and started my first business, an outside catering business providing food for events. And I remember the excitement of that time. I was building something of my own. I could make the decisions and create the menus. I could develop the service and choose the direction. And there is something incredibly exciting about seeing an idea that once existed only in your head suddenly become real. The first inquiry, the first booking, and the first customer who pays you money for something you created. Those moments mean something because somebody have chosen you and they've trusted you. And suddenly, your idea isn't just an idea anymore. It becomes a business. But I also discovered something very quickly. There is a massive difference between knowing how to do something and knowing how to build a business around it. I knew how to cook. I understood hospitality. I had management experience and I was studying business. But when it's your own business, everything feels different because there is nowhere for the responsibility to go. You are the business. If an inquiry comes in, you answer it. If a customer needs a quote, you prepare it. If something needs ordering, you order it. And if something goes wrong, you fix it. So you become the chef and the salesperson and the marketeer and the buyer and the administrator and the customer service department. And sometimes the cleaner at the end of a very long day. Now, starting that business taught me lessons that no textbook ever could. I learned about pricing and how easy it is to confuse being busy with being profitable, because you can have a diary full of work and still not have a sustainable business. I learned about costs, not just the obvious ones, the ingredients, the equipment, the staff, but the hidden costs, your time, travel, preparation, cleaning, administration, and the hours spent answering inquiries that never become bookings. I learned about customers, how important communication is, how important trust is, and how one good experience can lead to another opportunity, and how quickly a damaged reputation can travel. I learned a lot about pressure, because when you work for somebody else, a difficult day at work is still a difficult day. But when it's your own business, you take it home with you. You think about it in the evening, you think about it in bed, and you think about the next booking and the next invoice, and that next customer and the next problem you might have to solve. And that's something I think we sometimes forget when we talk about entrepreneurship. We romanticize it, be your own boss, follow your passion, build your dream. And yes, there can be freedom, there can be excitement, and there can be an enormous sense of achievement. But there is also that huge responsibility, the uncertainty and the pressure, and moments where you question whether you're doing the right thing. But I wouldn't change that experience, because for the first time, I understood entrepreneurship from the inside. Not as a theory, not as a case study, not as somebody else's success story. I understood what it felt like to have an idea and then to have to make it work. I understood what it felt like to put your own name and reputation behind something. I also understood the excitement of winning work and the disappointment of losing work. The satisfaction of a successful event and the exhaustion that comes after it. And something else started happening during this chapter of my life. I began to realise that I enjoyed sharing what I knew. I had now experienced different parts of hospitality. I'd worked in professional kitchens, I'd trained in London, I'd experienced a family business, I'd moved into management and studied hospitality management, and I'd worked within a major organisation, and now I'd experienced running a business of my own. I had made mistakes and learnt lessons and built experience, and I started feeling that perhaps the next stage of my journey wasn't only about what I could achieve for myself. Maybe I could help somebody else at the beginning of their journey, and maybe I could take everything I'd learned and give some of it back. And that thought led me somewhere I never imagined I'd end up when I first walked into catering college at 16 years old. I went back to college, but this time I wasn't going back as a student, I was going back as an educator. So I went back to college, but this time I wasn't walking through the doors as a student, I was going back as a hospitality tutor. And if you told the 16-year-old version of me when I first started catering college that one day I'd return to education as the person standing at the front of the room, I don't think I would have believed you. Because teaching had never been part of the plan. But then again, very little of this journey had been part of a plan. I went into education because I felt that I had something to give back. By that point, I'd experienced different sides of hospitality industry. I'd worked in pubs and restaurants, I'd experienced the intensity of London, I'd worked in management, and I'd studied hospitality management, and I'd worked within a major organisation, and I'd experienced the reality of running my own business. And I had successes to share, but just as importantly, I had mistakes to share as well. Because I think there's enormous value in being taught by somebody who has actual experience of the reality of the subject they're talking about. Somebody who can say, I've tried this and I've made the mistake and this worked and this definitely didn't. And this is what I had learned from. But I discovered very quickly that knowing your subject and teaching your subject are two completely different things. Just because you understand something doesn't mean you can explain it. And just because something comes naturally to you doesn't mean it comes naturally to the person sitting in front of you. So I had to learn all over again. I trained as an educator. I learned about teaching, learning, assessment, communication and motivation. and how completely different every individual learner can be, because there is no single type of students. Some people walk into a classroom full of confidence and others have almost none. Some people know exactly where they want to go and others are completely lost. Some people learn really quickly and others need more time, and some people need challenging. Others need somebody to believe in them, and that was one of the biggest lessons education ever taught me. Sometimes people need somebody else to see their potential before they can see it themselves, and I loved watching people develop, watching somebody struggle with something and then finally understand it, and watching someone grow in confidence, and watching somebody discover that they're capable of more than they thought they were. Now, there's something incredibly powerful about that, and it started changing my understanding of ambition, because ambition isn't always loud. It isn't always somebody standing up and declaring that they're going to build a huge business or change the world. Sometimes ambition is much quieter. It's the student who walks into a classroom terrified but keeps coming back. And it's the person who's been told that they're not academic but decides to try anyway. And it's somebody learning a skill that could change the direction of their whole life. And it's somebody slowly beginning to believe, maybe I can do this. And while I was helping other people learn, I was continuing to learn myself. I went on to complete my master's degree in education, and that was a huge undertaking. I was working, teaching, studying and managing life alongside all of it. There were really long days and late nights and deadlines, and there were research and assignments and plenty of moments where I'd wonder why I'd put myself through it. But completing that degree meant a lot to me, because the 16-year-old who had left school to become a chef had now completed the bachelor's degree and the master's degree. And I think that's another important lesson from my journey. Don't allow an old version of yourself to decide what the future version of you is capable of. You are allowed to grow, and you are allowed to discover new strengths, and you're allowed to become interested in things you've never expected to be interested in, and you are allowed to surprise yourself. Now, education's given me a completely new set of skills. I could communicate, I could teach, I could develop people, and I could take complicated information and make it understandable. But there was still another part of me, this entrepreneur that was burning inside. That part hadn't disappeared. If anything, it was becoming louder again, because I started wondering whether I could bring all these different parts of my life together. The chef, the manager, the business graduate, the entrepreneur, and now the educator. Could I create something that combined all of them, and could I build a business around food, but also around learning? Could I create experiences where people came together and developed new skills and enjoyed themselves? And that question led to one of my favourite chapters of my entire career, Anglesey Cookery School, a business that would bring together almost everything I'd learned so far and teach me more about business, ambition and myself than I could ever have expected. And that question led me to one of the most exciting chapters of my journey. I started my second business, the Anglesey Cookery School, and I can genuinely say I loved it. I loved the idea and building it and teaching. I loved meeting the people who came through the doors, and looking back now, I think one of the reasons it meant so much to me was because for the first time, so many different parts of my journey came together in one place. The 16-year-old chef was there, the experience I'd gained in restaurants and hotels was there, the pastry chef who had gone away to London was there, the manager was there, and the business graduate was there, and the entrepreneur was there, and also the educator was there. All these different versions of me suddenly had a purpose in the same business, and I think that's one of the most fascinating things about a career journey. Sometimes when you're living through the individual chapters, they can feel completely disconnected, and you wonder why you took that job, why you spent years studying that subject, and why you went through that difficult period, and why you changed direction, and why one plan didn't work out the way you expected. But then, sometimes, you reach a point where all the pieces suddenly begin to connect. Anglesey Cookery School was that moment for me. I wasn't simply teaching people how to follow a recipe, I was creating an experience. People were giving up their time and spending their money to come and learn something. So the whole experience mattered, how they discovered the business, how I communicated with them, and how they were welcomed, and how the session was structured, and how confident they felt, and whether they enjoyed themselves, and whether they left feeling like they'd actually achieved something, and importantly, whether they would tell somebody else about the experience. That business taught me so much about customers, about branding and reputation, marketing and communication, and about understanding what you're really selling, because people weren't simply buying a cookery lesson, they were buying an experience, and they were buying time with friends or family, and they were buying confidence, and buying the feeling of learning something new. And they were buying the story they could go home and tell. And understanding that changed how I thought about business. Because sometimes, as business owners, we become so focused on the thing we're selling that we forget to ask what the customer is actually buying. Those are not always the same thing. The business grew, I learned and I experimented, I made mistakes and improved things, and along the way, Anglesey Cookery School went on to win 2 awards, and I was incredibly proud of that, not just because of the recognition itself, but because when you build something yourself, you know what sits behind it. Other people see the finished product, they see the business name and the photographs and the customers and your social media posts and the awards, but you remember everything that happened when nobody was watching, that uncertainty and the decisions and the planning and those long days and the ideas that didn't work and the ideas that absolutely worked, and the moments where you questioned yourself and the moments where you wondered whether anybody would actually pay for the thing you'd created. And then when something you've built is recognised, it means something because you know the journey behind it. And Anglesey Cookery School taught me something else that I think is really important. Your career doesn't have to be a ladder. For years we're taught to think about careers as a straight line. You start here, then you get promoted, then you move up, then you move up again. But my career has never looked like that. Mine has been more like a toolbox. Every experience gave me another tool. Working as a chef gave me the one set of tools, London gave me another, management added more, and my degree added more. And then starting a business added more, and teaching added more, and my master's degree added more. And then suddenly I had an idea that required all of them. That's why I don't believe that changing direction means you've wasted time. The job you have today might be teaching you something you'll need 10 years from now. And the skill you're learning might eventually become part of a business that doesn't even exist yet. The difficult experience you're going through might give you an understanding that helps somebody else later in your life. You don't always know what you're collecting the tools for. Sometimes you only understand when you finally have them all. And I think that's what ambition has looked like throughout my life. It hasn't been one enormous goal that I've chased since I was 16. It's been curiosity, trying something and learning and growing, and then asking, what else could I do? What else could I build? Or what else could I learn? And after building Anglesey Cookery School, another opportunity eventually came along, one that would take me into a different kind of business experience, because up until that point, I'd started businesses from nothing. I'd created the idea and built the service and found the customers, but next I was going to experience something completely different. I was going to buy an existing business, a local delicatessen with an outside catering operation, and I was about to discover that buying a business is a very different experience from starting one. After starting businesses of my own, the next chapter of my journey took me into completely different territory. I bought an existing business, a local delicatessen with an outside catering operation, and I quickly discovered that starting a business and buying a business are 2 very different experiences. When you start something from nothing, you create the story, you build the systems, and you find the customers, and you create those expectations. But when you buy an existing business, you inherit a story that's already been written. There are already customers and suppliers and expectations and systems and habits and ways of doing things, and sometimes already problems. It was another enormous learning curve for me, because now I wasn't just thinking about creating something exciting, I was thinking about keeping something moving every single day. Now the doors had to open, the customers have to be served, the stock has to be there, and the suppliers have to be paid. The numbers have to work. And that experience gave me an even deeper understanding of what it really means to run a business. Because I think we often see businesses from the outside. We walk past a shop and see the lights on, we see the customers inside, we see the photographs on social media, or we see a busy event and the finished product. But the business owner sees something completely different. They see the electricity bill and the invoices and the wage bill and the piece of equipment that suddenly stopped working and the customer who hasn't been paid yet and the stock that hasn't sold. The unexpected quiet week, and the decision has to be made today, even though you don't yet know whether it's the right decision. And one of the biggest things that experience taught me was this: revenue isn't the same as profit. Being busy isn't the same as being successful, and looking successful from the outside doesn't always mean that everything feels successful on the inside. And those lessons stay with you. I learned more about margins, cash flow, stock control and pricing and customer behaviour, and supplies and time management, and decision making, and pressure, real pressure, Because when you own a business, responsibility has a habit of following you home. You can physically lock the door at the end of the day, but mentally, sometimes the business comes home with you. You're sitting on the sofa thinking about tomorrow, or you're lying in bed thinking about a decision. You wake up remembering something that needs to be done. And when something goes wrong, there's no mysterious person above you who's going to arrive and fix everything. Eventually, the decision lands with you. And I think that's why I have such an enormous respect for people who start and run businesses, because entrepreneurship is often presented as this glamorous escape from employment. Become your own boss, work when you want, and build the life of your dreams. And yes, business ownership can be incredibly rewarding. There's nothing quite like creating something and winning a customer and seeing an idea work and building your own reputation and knowing that something exists because you made the decision to create it. But entrepreneurship also asks a lot from people. It asks you to make decisions without having all the answers, and it asks you to take responsibility when things don't go to plan. It asks you to carry uncertainty, and sometimes it asks you to keep showing up while quietly wondering whether you're doing the right thing. And that experience taught me a lot about business. But I think, even more importantly, it taught me a lot about business owners, about the person behind the business, because behind every logo is a human being. Behind every social media account is somebody making decisions, and behind every business plan is somebody taking a risk. And behind every new venture is somebody hoping that this thing they're building is going to work. And I didn't realise it at the time, but that understanding would become incredibly important in the next major chapter of my career. Because eventually I reached another crossroads. I'd been the chef, I'd been the manager, I'd been the student, and I'd been the educator. I'd started businesses and I'd built businesses, and now I'd experienced buying and running an existing business. And I started thinking about everything I'd learned, not just the theory, the reality, the mistakes, the difficult decisions, the excitement of starting something and the pressure of keeping it going. And I found myself becoming increasingly interested in other entrepreneurs, their ideas, their stories, their challenges, and why they started and what they were trying to build, what was stopping them from moving forward. And slowly, another ambition started forming. What if I could take everything I'd learned from my own journey and use it to help other people build theirs? And that question eventually brought me to the work I do today, helping entrepreneurs establish, develop and grow social enterprises. And without realising at the time, I was about to spend the next chapter of my career surrounded by ambitious people whose stories would eventually inspire me to start asking a much bigger question about my own life. What is my ambition now? Eventually, all of those experiences brought me to the work I do today, business consultancy. For the last 7 years, I've had the privilege of working with entrepreneurs and helping them establish, develop and grow social enterprises. And when I first started this chapter of my career, I thought I was bringing my experience to other people. My experience of hospitality, management, education and starting businesses, running businesses and buying businesses. I thought my role was to take everything I'd learned and use it to help other entrepreneurs move forward. And of course, that is a huge part of what I do. But what I hadn't expected was how much those entrepreneurs would teach me. Because I've had the privilege of meeting people at every stage of the journey. I've sat down with people who have a little more than an idea. Sometimes it's something they've been thinking about for years, and sometimes it's a problem in their community that nobody seems to be solving. And sometimes it's a personal experience that has made them think there has to be a better way. And sometimes when I first meet somebody, they don't even realise they're an entrepreneur yet. They just know they care deeply about something, and they know they want to change something and build something or protect something or indeed create something. And my job is often to help them take that ambition and begin turning it into something real. A business model, a plan, an organisation, an income stream, a social enterprise, something sustainable. And I've been fortunate enough to see what happens when an idea starts becoming real. I've seen people arrive with uncertainty and gradually grow in confidence. I've watched ideas become organisations. I've seen people create opportunities. And I've seen communities come together around a shared ambition. And I've worked with people who want to save important buildings and people who want to create services that currently don't exist. People who want to create jobs and people who want to tackle social problems. And people who simply looked at something and thought, this could be better. And I think working with so many different entrepreneurs changed my understanding of ambition, because ambition looks completely different for everybody. For one person, ambition might mean building a company that operates across the world, and for somebody else, it's creating one job for themselves. And for one person, success is millions of pounds in revenue, and for somebody else, it's keeping a community building open. It might be creating a service for 10 people who desperately need it. And it might be giving a young person their first opportunity. Or it might be protecting something for the next generation. And it might simply be proving to yourself that you can do something you're once terrified to try. And that's what fascinates me about ambition. There isn't one correct version of it. Your ambition doesn't have to impress anybody else. It doesn't have to make sense to everybody else. And it doesn't need to look good on social media. It just needs to mean something to you. And over the years, I've spent thousands of hours talking to entrepreneurs, listening, asking questions, and trying to understand what they're building and why they're building it and who it's for and what problem does it solve and how is it going to generate income and what might stop it from succeeding. And I would like to ask questions like, where do you want this to go? What does success look like for you? What impact do you want to create? And what's the bigger vision? And somewhere along the way, I started asking those questions of myself because I realized something. I had spent years helping other people build their ideas, and I'd helped other people think about their vision and their purpose and impact and their ambition. But what was mine? What did I want to build? What did I want the next chapter of my life to look like? And what did I want to be known for? And perhaps the most uncomfortable question of all, if I believed so strongly that other people should pursue their ideas, why wasn't I pursuing mine? And that question stayed with me for a long time. Because the truth is, it's much easier to give advice than it is to follow it yourself. And it's easier to tell somebody else to be brave, to take the first step or to test the idea, or to put themselves out there. It's much harder when the idea is yours, and when your face is attached to it, and when your name's attached to it, and when people know that they can see you trying and potentially see you fail. I think that's something many ambitious people struggle with. It's not always the fear of failure itself. Sometimes it's the fear of failing publicly. What will people think? And who does he think he is? Why is he doing that? And that can be embarrassing, and he'll never make that work. These voices can become incredibly loud, even when nobody has actually said anything. But after years of sitting opposite to entrepreneurs who were prepared to try, I started feeling like I owed it to myself to try too. Because I'd met people who had started with almost nothing, people who had changed direction later in life, and people who had built ideas after setbacks, and people who didn't have all the answers, they just had enough belief to take the next step. And I realised I didn't need to know exactly what the final destination looked like. I just needed to start. I knew the thing that fascinated me, and that was ambition. I knew I loved hearing people's stories, and I knew I loved asking entrepreneurs why they started. I knew I was fascinated by the moments that changed somebody's direction, and also the risks and the setbacks and the breakthroughs, and the reasons people keep going. And slowly, an idea began to take shape. What if I could create something that brought those stories together? What if I could build a platform around ambition? Not just success, not just money, not just the finished results, but the real journey, the uncertainty, the struggle, the ideas and the people, and the ambition behind it all. And that idea became Ambition to Achieve. And for the first time in a long time, I wasn't helping somebody else build their ambition, I was beginning to build mine. And that idea became Ambition to Achieve. And I want to be completely honest and open. I am at the beginning of this journey. I haven't built a massive platform, I don't have millions of followers, and I don't have a huge team working behind the scenes. I don't have a television production company following me around. Most of the time, it's just me. A couple of cameras, some microphones, a laptop and a phone, and an idea that I believe could become something much bigger. And strangely, I think that's one of the reasons I'm enjoying this chapter so much. Because I'm building again, I'm learning again, I'm uncomfortable again. And I think there is something incredibly powerful about being a beginner. We spend so much of our lives trying to become experts and trying to know the answers and trying to look like we know exactly what we're doing. But when you're building something new, you have to accept that you don't know everything. You do experiments and you try something, sometimes it works, sometimes it completely fails. And from that then you learn and you adjust and then you just try again. That's exactly where I am with Ambition to Achieve. I'm traveling around meeting entrepreneurs, I'm sitting down with people and listening to their stories, I'm asking them about their journey, their setbacks and their mistakes, and the moments where they nearly gave up, and the moments everything changed. And of course, I'm asking them about their ambition. I've been meeting people who have built businesses, people who have taken risks, and people who have created something from an idea. And every single conversation teaches me something. But Ambition to Achieve is bigger in my mind than simply sitting down and interviewing entrepreneurs. The interviews are part of it, but an important part. But the bigger ambition is to create a movement around ambition itself, because I think there are thousands of stories that never get told. And we hear from the famous entrepreneur, the millionaire, the billionaire, and the person standing at the finish line. And those stories can be inspiring. But what about the person who has just started? What about the person building a business from their kitchen table after the children have gone to bed? And what about the person who has opened their first shop and has no idea whether it's going to work? What about the entrepreneur who failed and had the courage to try again? And what about the person who has spent 20 years in one career and suddenly realised they want something more and different from life? What about the young person with a huge dream but no idea where to start? And those stories matter too. In fact, sometimes I think those are the stories we need to hear the most, because when somebody's already incredibly successful, it's easy to convince yourself that they're different from you. They had money, connections and luck. They were confident. Whatever story we need to tell ourselves. But when you hear from somebody ordinary, somebody from a town like yours, or somebody who had doubts, somebody who was frightened, or somebody who didn't have everything figured out, and they tried anyway, I think that's incredibly powerful. Because suddenly, the distance between their story and yours becomes smaller. And you start thinking, maybe I could try. Maybe I haven't left it too late. And maybe my idea isn't ridiculous. Maybe I don't need to have everything figured out before I begin. Maybe there is more in me than I've allowed myself to believe. And that's what I want ambition to achieve to do. I want it to become and make ambition visible. I want to travel around Wales and ask people one simple question. What's your ambition? Or what's the most ambitious thing you've done? I want to hear those answers and hear from entrepreneurs and creators, young people and older people, and people who have succeeded, or people who are just beginning, or people who have failed and started again. Because I genuinely believe ambition is contagious. When you're surrounded by people who are trying things, you start believing that you can try things too. When you hear somebody else's story, you start questioning the limits you put around your own. And my ambition for Ambition to Achieve is big. I want this to become one of the biggest platforms for ambition stories in Wales. And then I want to take it further. I want to build a community, and I want to create opportunities for ambitious people to connect. And I want to celebrate the people who are building businesses, creating projects and making things happen. And I want young people growing up in Wales to see ambition everywhere around them. And I want them to know that you don't have to come from a major city to build something. You don't need to have rich parents, and you don't need to know the right people from day one. You don't need to have your entire life figured out at 16, because I certainly didn't. You just need somewhere to begin. And I know there will be people who hear all of this and think, that's a bit ambitious, isn't it? Yes, it is. And that's the point. Because I've spent a large part of my career helping other people think bigger about what they could build. Now I'm giving myself permission to do the same. And I have no idea exactly where this will go, and that's the truth. I can't promise you that every idea will work. I can't promise you that every video will get thousands of views. I can't promise you that the journey will be straightforward. My life so far should be enough evidence that journeys are rarely straightforward. But I can promise myself one thing. I'm going to give it a real chance, because I don't want to reach the next chapter of my life and wonder what would have happened if I'd really tried. What would have happened if I'd picked up the camera, asked the question and sent the message, or approached that person, or built the platform and told the stories? What could this have become? I'd rather find out. And perhaps that's what ambition means to me now. Not knowing that you're going to succeed, but believing that the possibility is worth exploring. And Ambition to Achieve is my biggest ambition yet. And the strange thing is, when I look back at every chapter of my journey, I think every single one of them has been preparing me for this. When I was 16 years old, I thought I knew exactly what my life was going to look like. I was going to be a chef, and that was the plan. And back then I probably thought that ambition was about choosing a destination and then travelling towards it in a straight line. But 23 years later, I know that life doesn't really work like that, at least mine hasn't. My journey has taken me from Anglesey to London and back again, from kitchens to management, from being a student to becoming an educator, and from working in businesses to starting them, and from starting businesses to buying one, and from building my own ideas to helping other entrepreneurs build theirs. And now to sitting here at 39 years old, trying to build something completely new again. When I look back at all those different chapters now, I don't see a collection of random jobs anymore. I see different versions of myself. The 16-year-old chef taught me discipline. The young man who moved to London taught me that I was capable of leaving what I knew and stepping into a completely different world. Coming home taught me that changing direction isn't failure. Working in the family business taught me that experience is rarely wasted. Management taught me responsibility, and university taught me to think differently. The National Trust taught me about the balance between purpose and commercial reality. My first business taught me what entrepreneurship actually feels like when the responsibility is yours. And education taught me how powerful it can be to help somebody else recognise their own potential. Anglesey Cookery School taught me that sometimes the different pieces of your life eventually come together. Buying a business taught me about pressure, responsibility, and the reality behind the word entrepreneur. And consultancy taught me something I don't think I could have learned anywhere else. It taught me that ambition comes in thousands of different forms, and every single one of those experiences has contributed something to the person sitting here today. And that's why I don't believe anymore that a career has to make perfect sense while you live in it. Sometimes the chapter you're in now only makes sense when you reach the chapter that needs it. Maybe you're learning something today that you won't use for another 10 years. Or maybe the job you're in right now isn't your final destination. And maybe the thing that didn't work out has created space for something you haven't discovered yet. Maybe the period where you feel like you're standing still is actually preparing you for your next move. We put so much pressure on ourselves to have everything figured out, especially when we're young. We ask 16-year-olds, what are you going to do with your life? Now stop and think about that question. What are you going to do with your life? As if there has to be one answer. As if the decision you make as a teenager has to define the next 50 years. My answer has changed many times, and I'm really glad that it has, because I've changed, I've learned, I've made mistakes, I've succeeded and I've failed. I've met people who've completely changed how I think, and I've discovered strengths that I didn't know I had. And I've also discovered that there are things I once wanted that I don't want anymore. And that's not failure, that's growth. And maybe you're watching this from the middle of one of those uncertain chapters. Maybe you're burnt out. Maybe you've fallen out of love with something you once wanted desperately. Or maybe you're in a job that pays the bills but doesn't excite you anymore. Maybe you've got an idea that you keep thinking about. But every time you get close to starting, you talk yourself out of it. Maybe you think you're too old or too inexperienced or too ordinary. Maybe you think you need more money or confidence or knowledge or followers, or maybe you're seeking permission. I can't tell you what decision you should make, and I would never pretend that changing your life is easy. Responsibility is real, money is real, and fear is real. But I can tell you what my own journey has taught me. You don't have to know the ending to begin the next chapter. You don't have to see the whole road. Sometimes you just need to see the next step. And at 16, my next step was catering college. Then it was a local kitchen, then it was London, then back home into management and university, and lots of opportunities, then into business and education, and then into other businesses, and then another challenge, and now into consultancy. And here I am trying to build ambition to achieve. I couldn't see this journey at 16. I couldn't even see it at 25 or 30. There was no map, and there still isn't. And perhaps that's the part of ambition I've finally started to understand. Ambition isn't always knowing exactly where you're going. Sometimes it's simply refusing to believe that you've reached the limit of who you can become. And that's where I am now. I'm 39 years old. I've had a career, I've built businesses, I've studied and I've taught. I've helped other people build their ideas, I've made mistakes, and I've learnt lessons. And somehow I feel like I might only just be getting started, because ambition to achieve is the biggest ambition I've ever had. I don't know exactly where it will take me, I don't know how big it will become, but I know I'm going to find out. I'm going to keep meeting people and keep asking those questions, and keep telling the stories, and keep experimenting and learning and building, and keep asking one question: what's your ambition? Because somewhere right now, there's another 16-year-old trying to work out what to do with their life. There's somebody at 39 wondering whether it's too late to start something new. And there's somebody at 50 thinking about an idea they've carried for 20 years. And there's somebody sitting in a job they thought would make them happy and wondering why it doesn't. And there's somebody with an idea written in the notes app on their phone who hasn't told anybody about it yet. And perhaps somebody watching this video simply needs to hear this. Your journey doesn't have to look like anybody else's. It doesn't have to be a straight line. You are allowed to learn, and you are allowed to evolve. You are allowed to change direction, and you are allowed to have another ambition. My journey started 23 years ago with a 16-year-old lad from Anglesey who wanted to become a chef. I have absolutely no idea where the next 23 years will take me, but for the first time in a long time, I'm genuinely excited to find out. This is the next chapter of my story, and the question is, What's the next chapter of yours? I really hope you've enjoyed hearing a little bit more about my journey, and hopefully there's been something in there that you found useful, relatable, or maybe even a little bit inspiring. As always, thank you so much for watching. I genuinely appreciate every single person who takes the time to watch these videos. And if you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please do. And if you've enjoyed this video, do give it a like. It really does help the channel and helps more people discover what we're building here with Ambition to Achieve. Thanks again for watching, and I'll see you all again next week. Take care.